You've seen the cross. Wood, nails, blood, pain. But what if that's only half the story? What if, above the jeers of the crowd and the hammer of Roman soldiers, a war was raging in silence? Not with swords, not with screams, but with eternal purpose. Most people remember Golgotha from the ground. A hill outside Jerusalem, dust in the wind, a man dying between two thieves. A brutal execution, a political scandal, a tragic martyr. But what they don't see is what heaven saw, what the angels saw, what Lucifer saw. Because at the exact moment Jesus was lifted up between earth and sky, heaven held its breath. And two figures stood between the realms. Two of the most powerful beings ever created. Michael, the commander of heaven's armies. Uriel, the flame of God, bearer of divine mysteries. They weren't standing on the hill. They were hovering above it, unseen, unshakable, watching over a moment older than time. Their wings stretched wide across dimensions. Their forms burned with light the human eye couldn't comprehend. And yet they did nothing. Why? Because the king was dying, and no angel could interfere. The Bible tells us the sky went black at noon. Not a storm, not an eclipse, a divine blackout. Creation itself couldn't bear the moment. But this wasn't just grief. It was a veil descending over the natural world, blocking out the noise, so something greater could unfold in silence. In the spirit realm, Lucifer watched from his throne of shadows. The fallen cherub, the deceiver of Eden, the accuser of mankind, he had orchestrated this moment for millennia. Since the first prophecy was whispered, the seed of the woman will crush your head. And now, that seed, Jesus, was bleeding, broken, nailed to a Roman cross. Lucifer believed he had won, that the plan had worked, that heaven's son had been silenced. But something wasn't right. Why wasn't Jesus fighting back? Why weren't the angels retaliating? Why did heaven remain still? Because what looked like surrender was divine strategy. The cross was never a reaction. It was a trap. And Lucifer walked right into it. He didn't understand the silence of the angels. He mistook restraint for weakness. But Michael did not draw his sword because he was under orders. The war wasn't to be won by might, but by obedience. High above Golgotha, Michael stood like a wall of living fire. His armor shimmered with the names of God, glowing in the unseen light of heaven. His sword pulsed with unreadied judgment, but his grip held firm. This was not his time. Uriel stood beside him, a being of radiant wisdom. His body glowed like molten gold. Eyes like white-hot stars locked onto the man below, watching not with sorrow, but with reverence. Because they knew something no demon could see. They remembered the scroll. Before the first star was lit, before Eden, before time itself, there was a scroll. Sealed, sacred, divine. Inside it, the full plan of redemption. Every prophecy, every detail, every act of betrayal, every drop of blood, written by the hand of the Almighty. And now, in this hour, it was unfolding. Jesus wasn't being crucified because he was defeated. He was fulfilling a cosmic legal contract signed in eternity. He was choosing the cross, activating the scroll, executing the judgment that would set captives free. But Lucifer couldn't see it. He saw weakness, pain, silence. He didn't realize that was the plan. Because here's the secret. Real power doesn't always explode. Sometimes it bleeds. Sometimes it waits. Even the demons began to notice. Something was off. This wasn't how the war was supposed to go. And then, a moment so subtle, it echoed through eternity. Jesus whispered, not to the crowd, not to the soldiers, But into the spirit, hold the line. Michael heard it. Uriel heard it. And the angel stayed silent. Because the command had been given. The lamb must die. The scroll must open. The war must be won from the inside out. So I ask you, what if the greatest victory in history looked like a man dying in silence? What if the angels weren't sent to intervene, but to guard the transaction? What if every time you feel abandoned, heaven is not ignoring you? It's holding position. Hell expected thunder. When the Son of God was nailed to the cross, the demonic realm gathered in anticipation. Not to tremble, but to celebrate. To gloat. To witness what they believed was heaven's ultimate defeat. Lucifer had orchestrated this moment like a conductor of chaos. He stirred hearts to betrayal, stirred crowds to scream, stirred Rome to kill, and now he waited for the collapse of heaven's last hope. But what he didn't expect was silence. No fire, no angels descending, no heavenly roar, just silence. And that terrified him. Because Satan may not understand love or mercy or humility, but he understands power. And he knows true power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it bleeds in stillness. Jesus hung between worlds. The Lamb, the King. The Word made flesh. And yet, he said almost nothing. He didn't call for angels. He didn't cry for escape. He didn't rebuke Rome or silence the crowd or command the skies. He simply hung, suffering quietly in the eyes of men, but wielding authority in the spirit realm. Above him, Michael and Uriel remained unmoved. The two great archangels, burning with fire and prophecy, didn't lift a sword or release a word. And that silence was louder than war. Michael stood like a mountain forged in heaven. His hand gripped his sword, but it did not rise. He could feel every vibration in the spirit. He knew every legion that stood ready behind the veil. But still, he waited, because the command had not come. And heaven moves only by command. Uriel, radiant with wisdom, watched in perfect stillness. His eyes didn't waver. His fire didn't flicker, because he understood something deeper. This moment was not for intervention. It was for unveiling. Lucifer's confusion began to turn into concern. Where was the counterattack? Why hadn't Jesus summoned the hosts of heaven? He had done it before. Calmed storms. Cast out legions. Walked on water. But now, when abandoned, humiliated, and nailed to a tree, he did nothing? Lucifer leaned forward, uneasy. Because suddenly the silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. Demons began to sense it too. They circled the hill like vultures waiting for triumph. But something was wrong. The air felt dense, pregnant with something invisible. The earth beneath them throbbed like it knew a secret they didn't. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged. It was intentional. And then, without warning, Jesus spoke. Not to the crowd, not to the soldiers, but to his Father. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? My God, why have you forsaken me? But this wasn't a cry of doubt. It was a key. That cry pierced more than air. It tore through dimensions. It shattered the grip of legal authority in hell's courtrooms. It echoed across the halls of heaven. It ignited the battlefield in silence. It was the sound of a sun activating a plan older than stars. And for the first time in that long day, hell began to tremble. Because this was what they had never prepared for. Power, restrained. Divinity, submitted. Glory, crucified. They had seen wrath. They had seen fire. They had seen angels with flaming swords. But never this, a king who chose silence over spectacle. And that, above all, shook Lucifer to his core. Michael tensed. Uriel burned brighter. Neither moved. But both felt the shift. Something eternal had just happened. A signal issued not in command, but in surrender. A legal line had been crossed. A verdict had been released. Not in words, but in blood. The spirit realm fell into dread silence. Lucifer had no words. His celebration dissolved in confusion. The throne of death began to crack beneath him. Because the silence of heaven was not absence. It was alignment. Jesus was not abandoned. He was in full control, commanding from within his own suffering. And hell suddenly realized this silence was not powerlessness. It was power at rest. So if you've ever wondered why heaven didn't speak, why angels didn't intervene, why Michael and Uriel didn't rush to his side, it's because sometimes the greatest act of love is to hold the line, to let the lamb walk alone, so the world could walk free. So now I ask you, when God is silent in your life, is he absent? Or is he waiting like Michael because the moment must unfold? Because maybe your silence isn't failure. Maybe it's a setup. Maybe it's a scroll unfolding in agony. And maybe, just maybe, heaven is still moving in your stillness. Before nails, before wood, before Rome, before Adam ever drew breath, there was a scroll, not made of parchment, not inked with human hands. It was written in light, sealed in eternity, buried deep in the heart of God himself. And no one, not angel, not man, not even Michael, was worthy to open it. Only one. Only the Lamb. Revelation speaks of this scroll. 7 seals. 7 decrees. 7 locks that held the destiny of mankind and the justice of heaven in waiting. And at the center of Calvary, as Jesus hung between 2 worlds, that scroll was opening. Not in the hands of angels, but in the blood of obedience. You see, the cross wasn't a reaction. It was an execution, not of a man, but of a plan. Every lash was a line. Every thorn, a phrase. Every drop of blood, a sentence written in eternal ink. Hell thought the crucifixion was chaos, but heaven saw choreography. What looked like tragedy to the world was the scroll being unsealed line by line. Michael stood watch, not as a soldier preparing for war, but as a guardian of holy protocol. He wasn't defending Jesus. He was defending the process. Because this wasn't just a moment, it was a transaction. A divine legal proceeding witnessed by thrones and dominions, where guilt would be transferred, where sin would be placed, where righteousness would be reassigned. Uriel felt the scroll unfolding in his bones. The flame of divine revelation coursed through his being. He had seen shadows of this moment since the foundation of time. Hints, symbols, echoes in the heavens. But this was the moment the mystery cracked open. Jesus wasn't dying because of betrayal. He was dying because of alignment. The scroll required it. The law demanded it. Justice insisted. Sin had a price. And Jesus wasn't negotiating, he was paying. Not just with pain, but with perfect obedience. And in the spiritual courtroom, everything stopped. Lucifer entered, not with violence, but with accusation. The accuser of the brethren stood, scanning the scroll, searching for fault, looking for a clause, a loophole, a reason to interrupt. But there was none, because the Lamb was spotless. The offering was flawless, and the scroll kept opening. What no prophet could open, what no priest could touch, Jesus was fulfilling with every breath. His silence wasn't weakness, it was courtroom precision. Every second on the cross was a legal step deeper into the scroll. He was not just dying for sin, he was canceling every record of wrong. One law at a time, one curse at a time, one blood-soaked word at a time. Michael knew it. Uriel saw it. Hell felt it. This was the verdict being executed. The plan unfolding before the foundations of the world. The eternal word, writing redemption in crimson. And then, deep in the spirit, a shift. As the scroll reached its final portion, heaven began to tremble. Not with fear, but with anticipation. Because what began as obedience was about to become invasion. Lucifer took one final look. He had watched the scroll unfold. He had heard the verdict's echo. And he knew he'd been outplayed before time began. This was not the end of Jesus. This was the end of his reign. And so the accuser vanished, retreating to the only thing he had left: delay. Because he knew the lamb may be dying. But resurrection was already built into the scroll. Uriel lifted his hand. The scroll ignited in golden flame, not to destroy, but to confirm. Sealed, fulfilled, completed. The final words written in the king's own blood. And Michael stepped back, sword lowered in awe, because now there was nothing left to hold heaven back. So what does it mean? It means your life was not an afterthought. It was written. It was counted. It was included. Every fall, every tear, every cry for help. Your name was not scribbled in later. It was sealed before time with intention. And on the cross, that scroll was paid in full. So I ask you, what if your life is not random but redemptive? What if your struggle has been prophesied and your freedom already purchased? What if the silence you're in now is the scroll opening over your life? It didn't look like a courtroom. It looked like a hill. Dust. Nails. Blood. Screams. A body breaking. But make no mistake, this was a courtroom. And not just any courtroom. This was the highest courtroom in all creation, where spiritual laws are enforced, where covenants are sealed, and where eternity is decided. And in this court, the verdict was about to be rendered, not against Christ, but for you. Jesus didn't just die for sin. He became sin. Every lie you've ever told, every wound you've ever hidden, every thought you were ashamed to admit, every generational curse passed down like poison in your blood, all of it placed on him. And in the spirit realm, it wasn't poetic. It was legal, precise, calculated. The judge of heaven watched in silence. The scroll of redemption had reached its most terrifying line. The Lamb shall bear the iniquity of them all. And in that moment, the transfer happened. You couldn't see it with human eyes. But in the spirit, everything shifted. Like ink staining a blank page, your darkness poured into him. And his righteousness, it began pouring out toward you. Lucifer was watching. He saw it too late. The plan wasn't just to kill Jesus, it was to trade places. The innocent condemned, the guilty redeemed. And as the spiritual transaction unfolded, Lucifer understood. He was being outmaneuvered. Again. That's why Michael was there. The archangel didn't draw his sword to fight. He stood like a living firewall, separating the transaction from demonic interference. Because in moments like this, the enemy doesn't need to shout. He whispers. He sneaks. He looks for loopholes, tiny cracks to twist what God has spoken. But Michael allowed no cracks. He stood between the cross and the shadows, sword glowing, presence radiating divine legal order. No demon could approach. No curse could slip in. No accusation could rewrite what was happening. Michael wasn't defending a man. He was defending a covenant. And that covenant was being written in real time with nails, thorns, and blood. Uriel stood opposite him, radiant with holy flame, eyes fixed on Jesus, his very being pulsing with unspoken revelation. He wasn't just a watcher. He was a guardian of understanding. As Jesus absorbed the sin of the world, Uriel began to release something just as powerful: light. Not physical light, but spiritual clarity, a wave of divine insight that would ripple forward across time. That light would one day blind Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus. That light would pierce the hearts of apostles, ignite revivals, awaken nations, and open eyes for generations. Uriel wasn't speaking, but his silence was shining. Demons felt it. The transaction wasn't going their way. They tried to interfere, but the courtroom was locked. They tried to accuse, but the charges had already been transferred. They tried to twist the law, but the lawgiver was hanging on the cross. And he wasn't breaking the law. He was fulfilling it. Jesus groaned, not just in pain, but in power. Because in the invisible realm, the weight of sin wasn't symbolic, it was crushing. He carried the fullness of what you and I couldn't bear for a moment, and he carried it all the way to death. And here's the mystery most believers miss. Jesus didn't lose power on the cross. He restrained it. He held every right to resist. He could have undone Rome with a breath. He could have called 12 legions of angels. But he didn't. Because power restrained is the signature of God. And restraint is what made the transaction legal. When he said, "No one takes my life, I lay it down," he wasn't being poetic. He was giving the judge of heaven the legal ground to do what had never been done. Justify the guilty, without violating justice. So I ask you, what sins still haunt you? What shame still whispers that you're unworthy? Because if it was placed on him, it no longer belongs to you. You can't carry what the Lamb already paid for. You can't atone for what's been transferred. And the enemy can't accuse you for what's no longer yours. That's why the veil would soon tear. That's why hell would soon collapse. Because this moment, this transfer, was the foundation for every miracle, every healing, every act of deliverance ever to come. And it all happened in silence, watched by angels, defended by heaven, signed in blood. It sounded like nothing. Just a rip, a tear, fabric splitting in silence. But in the spirit realm, it was louder than thunder. Louder than Mount Sinai itself. Because at the very moment Jesus released his final breath, something ancient gave way. Not in Rome, not on Golgotha, but in the heart of the temple. The veil, a wall of thick woven fabric, 60 feet tall, 4 inches thick, stood for centuries between man and the most sacred presence of God. Behind it, the Holy of Holies. A place so holy, so untouchable, only the high priest could enter, and only once a year, carrying blood, trembling, afraid. To approach carelessly meant death. To even see behind the veil meant judgment. It was the last boundary between earth and heaven. And yet, the moment the Lamb died, it tore in two, from top to bottom, from heaven to earth. But this wasn't just fabric. It was a barrier, a no-entry sign in the language of eternity. A constant reminder, you are not holy enough to come close. For generations, mankind had been shut out. Even the best of us, even the purest, shut out. And God had upheld that boundary, not out of cruelty, but out of mercy. Because unfiltered holiness would consume sinful flesh. But now something had changed. The Lamb had died. The blood had been spilled. The scroll had been fulfilled. And so the veil, the age-old warning, was no longer needed. It didn't just fall. It was ripped down by the hand of God. What the world saw as defeat, heaven revealed as access. And in that moment, the message of the cross thundered through every dimension. Come in! But it goes deeper still. Because that veil wasn't just guarded by laws, it was guarded by angels. Cherubim were embroidered into the veil itself, just like the flaming guardians at Eden's gates. They were sentinels of separation, divine security. Their presence said, "You can come no further." And now they step back, not in rebellion, but in reverence. Because the blood of Jesus had not desecrated the Holy of Holies. It had qualified us to enter. Michael felt it. As Jesus exhaled his final breath, Michael's grip on his sword loosened. Not in surrender, but in victory. He didn't need to guard the boundary anymore, because the boundary was gone. The covenant had been fulfilled. Justice had been satisfied. The judgment had been absorbed. And now, God wasn't sending fire from the holy place. He was sending an invitation. Uriel burned with revelation. He had guarded the mysteries of God for eons. But now, they were being unveiled. What was hidden in symbols was now alive in blood. What prophets saw in shadow, the Lamb had fulfilled in light. Uriel's fire surged one last time as he released a final wave of understanding. The presence of God, it was no longer behind the veil. It was moving into the hearts of men. In the spiritual realm, a shift like no other unfolded. Centuries of angelic order restructured. Protocols of approach rewritten. Eternal restrictions revoked. Because God no longer needed a temple made by hands. Now his temple would be you. And still the world didn't fully understand. To many, the tearing of the veil was a strange coincidence. A temple rumor. But in the spirit, it was the sound of chains breaking, of barriers falling, of heaven saying, "You are welcome now." The veil wasn't just torn, it was rendered powerless. Because nothing, no priest, no bloodline, no ritual was needed anymore to approach God. All that was required? Faith in the blood of the Lamb. So let me ask you, what veil still stands between you and God? What lie tells you you're too broken, too dirty, too far gone to come close? Because if God tore the veil, why are you trying to stitch it back together? If heaven opened access, why are you standing outside? The veil has been removed. Not with scissors, but with blood-soaked hands. God didn't just give you permission to come closer. He ripped the door open himself, and he's still whispering, "Come," boldly, freely, now. The earth stood still. The veil had torn. The Lamb had breathed his last, and the crowd began to walk away. But the real battle had just begun. Because Jesus didn't merely die, he descended. Not poetically, not metaphorically, but literally, spiritually, eternally. Into Sheol, the realm of the dead. To ancient Hebrews, Sheol was not hell as we imagine it today. It was a holding place, a great divide beneath the earth. One side held the wicked in torment. The other, the righteous in rest, was called Abraham's bosom. Between them, a vast chasm no man could cross. But Jesus was no ordinary man. He didn't come to visit. He came to conquer. When his body lay still in the tomb, his spirit walked through gates untouched by time. There was no fanfare, no shouts, just authority. Every step echoed through eternity. Every shadow recoiled. Because for the first time since Eden, God himself was walking through death's domain. Michael followed, the war angel, sword in hand, silent, unstoppable, not to defend Jesus, but to enforce the verdict that had just been written in blood. Where Jesus went, heaven's court followed. Uriel walked beside him, the flame of revelation, scroll in hand, eyes blazing, light pulsing from his very form. He had watched over the mysteries of God for ages, but now they were about to be unleashed. Because the king wasn't entering Sheol to be questioned. He came to claim. The atmosphere shifted. Even the darkest corners of the underworld began to tremble. The watchers, fallen angels bound since the days of the flood, felt it first. Those ancient rebels, imprisoned in chains of gloom, sensed something terrifying in their midst. Not wrath, not judgment. Something worse for them. Authority. The chained giants of old stirred in the depths. Spirits of Nephilim howled in forgotten corridors. The echoes of rebellion from Genesis 6 began to falter, because the very one they thought they had escaped was standing in their prison. And he wasn't angry. He was victorious. Lucifer felt it too. In the halls of Sheol, the prince of darkness, once confident, now uncertain, felt something shift in his bones. He had left Golgotha satisfied. But now, the air around his throne thickened. The ground beneath him trembled. The silence of heaven had turned into a storm underground. And at its center walked Jesus. He didn't knock on the gates. He spoke. "Lift up your heads, O you gates. Be lifted, you everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in." Psalm 24:7. And Sheol responded, not with defiance, but with groaning. The gates groaned not from metal grinding, but from legal chains breaking. Every spiritual lock forged by sin, by death, by Adam's fall, undone by the blood of the Lamb. Jesus walked forward, gloriously silent, eternally sure. And behind him, the captives: Abraham, Moses, David, Elijah. Generations of righteous souls, waiting, watching. Every one of them had died in faith. They saw shadows but not fulfillment. Promises but not the promise. Until now, they saw the veil torn. They saw the Word made flesh enter their prison. They saw the light pierce the grave. And they rose. Uriel opened the scroll. It burned with truth. Names written in glory. Prophecies fulfilled. As he read, a wave of revelation lit the caverns of Sheol. Every soul whose hope had flickered now burned with fire. This wasn't rescue. This was reversal. The grave was no longer a waiting room. It had become a runway for resurrection. Michael raised his sword, but not to strike. To declare. The verdict is final. The blood is accepted. The king has come. The keys will be returned. And Lucifer? Silent. Frozen. Powerless. He wasn't being challenged. He was being evicted. So what does this mean for you? It means Jesus didn't sneak out of death. He broke it from the inside. He entered the lowest place, so that no sin, no shame, no chain, no past could ever be lower than his victory. He didn't just defeat death for himself. He went there to bring you back with him. So if you feel forgotten, if you feel buried in darkness, if you feel chained by something no one else sees, remember, he's been there. And he holds the keys. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He didn't plead. He took. Because when Jesus stood in the deepest pit of death's domain, scars still open, glory burning through the dark, he didn't come as a guest. He came as owner. The realm of Sheol had never seen anything like this. No prophet, no saint, no angel had ever walked these depths with complete authority. But the Son of God had come to reclaim what was stolen. The air was still. Demons crouched in the corners, silent. The watchers dared not speak. Lucifer sat frozen on his crumbling throne. No chains rattled. No whispers stirred. Because something more terrifying than wrath was now present, a king with nothing left to prove. And everything to reclaim. Then the keys appeared. Not metal. Not crafted by man. But forged in divine justice. They hovered in the air like glowing instruments of judgment, etched with names older than time: death, Hades, grave, separation, silence. Each key pulsed with authority stolen from Adam in Eden. Each key represented access the enemy had hoarded for generations. Until now, Jesus lifted his hand. No lightning flashed. No sword clashed. Just a voice, silent in the natural, thunderous in the spirit. They're mine. And the keys responded. One by one, they moved into his hand. The transfer wasn't dramatic. It was final. Because when heaven acts by legal right, no force can resist. This wasn't robbery. This was enforcement. And Michael was there to witness it. The Archangel of War stepped forward, his armor glowing with heaven's signature. He did not raise his sword in aggression. He raised it in acknowledgement. Heaven had sent him not to fight, but to certify. This transfer is lawful. This victory is sealed. The authority is returned to the rightful king. No demon objected. No spirit dared. Because in that moment, the kingdom of darkness realized their gates had been breached. From within, Uriel stepped beside the king. Scroll still open, but now the final line was written. He holds the keys. And as the words glowed with light, a surge of revelation shot through Sheol. The righteous stirred. Abraham raised his head. Moses stood in awe. David wept in joy. Every soul who had died in hope finally saw hope in the flesh. He had come, not just to visit, but to lead them out. Uriel released fire from his hands, flames of truth that lit every corridor of the underworld. The mystery was no longer hidden. The plan was no longer delayed. The gates were no longer locked, because the one who authored life had just taken back the access code to eternity. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Jesus turned. He looked into the deepest darkness, not with fear, not with hatred, but with holy finality. He lifted the keys and declared to the very foundations of death, "Enough!" And with that single word, chains broke, bars split, walls cracked, and the gates of Sheol opened. This was no jailbreak. It was a release order from the throne of God. The souls that had been held in waiting didn't run in chaos. They walked behind the king in order. A procession of prophecy. A parade of promise. From Abraham to John the Baptist, a line of redeemed history followed Jesus as he ascended from below. And death was left in silence. Lucifer? Powerless. He didn't lose the keys in a fight. He handed them over in defeat. Because when Jesus fulfilled the law, the accuser lost his grounds. And when the price was paid, hell lost its claim. So what does this mean for you? It means the gates that once held you don't belong to hell anymore. Your shame? No longer chained. Your addiction? No longer locked away. Your future? No longer buried. Because the one who holds the keys holds the authority over everything that ever tried to destroy you. So stop living like the doors are still closed. They're not. Stop listening to the voice that says you're still condemned. You're not. Stop fearing what is already bowed. Because the king is alive. And he has the keys. The stone was still in place. The Roman seal unbroken. The guards were stationed, unaware of how powerless they truly were. Because the war wasn't in the tomb. It had already been won beneath it. In realms unseen. In depths unreachable. Jesus had crushed the gates of death and reclaimed the keys of the grave. Now something was about to shift. Not in whispers, but in earth-shaking glory. It began in silence. Not because nothing was happening, but because something too holy for sound was beginning to stir. The borrowed tomb trembled. The ground quaked. Heaven leaned in. Then, a breath. The first breath of the new creation. Jesus opened his eyes. Not as a beaten man, but as the risen king. Not limping out of death, but ruling over it. The body that was broken now pulsed with power. The scars still visible, but now they shone like crowns of proof. This wasn't resuscitation. It was resurrection. At that moment, eternity shifted. Time itself bent in reverence. Every prophecy that pointed to this hour fulfilled. What began in Genesis with "you shall surely die" had now become "he is not here, he is risen." But Jesus didn't rise alone. He walked out of the grave, and behind him, a host. Saints of old, Abraham, Moses, David, all who had waited in Sheol's promise, now walked in the freedom of its fulfillment. The graves opened. The dead rose. Not as ghosts, not as shadows, but as living witnesses to the most supernatural event in history. The Roman guards fell to the ground. Not from fear of a man, but from the weight of glory that had just stepped out of stone. The sun rose, but it wasn't the only light. Because the one who said, "I am the light of the world," was now burning brighter than 1,000 mornings. Meanwhile, in the spirit realm, Michael raised his sword, not for war, but for coronation. The war angel had watched empires rise and fall, but never before had he stood in the presence of such victory. Uriel sealed the scroll. The mysteries had been revealed. The covenant enacted. The veil destroyed. The prison emptied. The keys reclaimed. The light had descended into darkness and returned with resurrection in his hands. Heaven roared, not in chaos, but in worship. Angels who had stood silent at the cross now erupted in song. All creation groaned when he died. Now it sings because he lives. And still, he walked out humbly. No throne. No horses. No crown of gold. Only a scarred brow. A radiant face. And open arms. He didn't ascend into heaven that moment. Why? Because there were still people to speak to. Still hearts to ignite. Still wounds to touch. Because resurrection wasn't just proof. It was personal. To Mary, he spoke her name. To Thomas, he offered his wounds. To Peter, he gave restoration. And to all of us, he gave invitation. Not to observe, but to follow. You see, the resurrection is not just something that happened to Jesus. It's something that's now been offered to you. Not just life after death, but victory in the middle of it. You're not waiting for freedom at the end. You're walking with the resurrected one now. So let me ask you, what do you still think is too dead for God to resurrect? What part of you, your calling, your identity, your faith, has been locked in a tomb? Because the king didn't leave any keys behind. He holds them all. He's already opened the grave. You just need to walk out. This is the gospel. Not religion. Not ritual. But a real man with real scars and real victory saying, "It is finished. Now come with me." And now, the cross was not abandonment. It was strategy. The silence was not defeat. It was command. The tomb was not a prison. It was a throne room in disguise. So rise. Walk out of whatever's held you back. Because the war is over. The grave is empty. And your name is echoing in heaven's courts. This is the end of the 8-part story, but the beginning of everything for you. Don't just admire the resurrection, live it. Share your thoughts below. What moment wrecked you the most? Type "he holds the keys" in the comments if you're ready to rise. And remember, resurrection isn't coming. It's already here.